But we're here today for Brad Stulberg. Yes. He writes about health and science of human performance. He's a columnist with Outside Magazine, New York Magazine, has written for Forbes, NPR, LA Times, Runner's World, and the Huffington Post. He has also worked as a consultant for McKinsey & Company, where he counsels some of the world's top executives on a broad range of issues. He is an avid athlete, as you might expect, an outdoor enthusiast, and is known for his ability to merge the latest science with compelling personal stories. Offering readers practical insights on what they can apply to their own lives, which brings us to peak performance, elevate your game, avoid burnout, and thrive with the new science of success. An eminently readable, very enjoyable, in my personal opinion, book to read and to kind of apply what I need to know to be doing a little better in many aspects of my life. And so I want to please welcome Brad Stulberg to Laurel Book Store.
Let's see, my name, along with someone named Steve Magness, who is a coach of Olympic runners, and he's also a physiologist, so exercise performance scientist. The two of us teamed up in over the last, well, it says 2 years, but it's already outdated, so 2.5 to 3 years. We reported on the science of human performance. So what that means, not just athletes. We were interested in trying to uncover principles that drive elite performance across domains. So we spoke with athletes, artists, world-class intellectual performers, and then entrepreneurs. Much like we looked across various capabilities, we also looked across different domains of the literature and science. So we spent a lot of time in cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology, physiology, and even some philosophy. This last bullet is my favorite. So the book has over 150 notes. So it's not bro science, it's real science. What I mean by that is a lot of books in the genre are full of, 9 different hacks to become Superman or Superwoman. And needless to say, those 9 hacks just never work, which is why you buy the next one. There are no quick fixes in this book. So that disappoints a lot of people, but the science says, unfortunately, there are no quick fixes. What did we learn? 3 major themes, and the book's broken down into 3 sections, a section for each of these themes. So the first theme is what my co-author and I call the growth equation, and it's this notion that stress plus rest equals growth, and we'll get into that in a minute. The second large theme is priming, which is really about getting your mind and body in the right state to perform. And again, whether that performance is athletic, creative, entrepreneurial, it doesn't really matter. A lot of the same principles apply. And then the last big theme was purpose. And in particular, the power of having a purpose that is something beyond yourself is a motivating force. Sounds kind of new agey, but there's actually a remarkable amount of very interesting research behind that. So we're going to start with the growth equation. So stress plus rest equals growth. Too much stress, not enough rest, and you get injury, illness, or burnout. Not enough stress, too much rest, and you get complacency and stagnation. So the next slide will show a picture of a bicep. So anyone here know how to make a bicep muscle stronger? Some pretty buff guys. So how do you make your bicep stronger?
Work on things.
Right, so you lift heavy things. But if you pick up a weight that is way too heavy, odds are you're going to throw your back out, or you might even tear your bicep tendon. You could also sit there and lift a 1-pound weight all day, and your bicep probably won't grow. So in order to make your bicep muscle, or really any muscle in your body, get bigger, you've got to find a weight that is challenging and might even push the muscle close to the point of failure, but is not so heavy that it's going to cause injury or complete fatigue and burnout. So in exercise science, this is called either periodization or progressive overload. And it's the notion that to grow a muscle, you want to work it with an appropriate stressor, and then step away, let the muscle recover, and then it gains the capacity to take on a little bit more stress. You repeat that cycle over and over again, that's how you make a muscle grow. What's really interesting is when you look at the research on creative arts and in reporting with musicians, visual artists, material artists, what my co-author and I found is that the way to grow a creative muscle is quite similar. In the research, it's called skills come from struggle. So if you want to get better at the piano per se, much like when you lift a weight, you want to really push yourself to a point that's almost uncomfortable and step away. That's also how you would improve at really any type of art. So it's this notion of really working yourself to a point of discomfort and then stepping away. So the best musicians that we spoke with, Taylor Swift's drummer, a guy named Matt Billingsley, he said that his practice sessions, like you think that it would be fun, you know, pounding away on the drums, he said they're extremely uncomfortable because he is so in the zone and so focused on what he's working on. And when he leaves a practice session, not only is he physically fatigued, because playing the drums is fatiguing, but psychologically he's like just spent. And there's a pretty wide body of research called deliberate practice, which is a more complex way of saying that a lot of musicians, when they practice, it's very deliberate, intentional, very intense, and then it's only when they step away from that that work kind of sets in. So then, when you look to more intellectual performance, how do you usher in creativity, breakthrough thinking? So, literature shows it's a 3-step process. So the first step is immersion, which is when you really throw yourself into whatever it is that you're working on. The second step is what scientists call incubation, and that's when you step away. So you've been deep in the weeds of the material that you're working on. You're not going to have a creative breakthrough or a thought when you're deep in the weeds. You have to step away. It's an incubation period. And the third phase is insight. On a micro level, this is why so many people tend to have aha moments in the shower or upon first waking up from a nap. Another very common instance is to have a creative thought during a walk. Researchers just up the street at Stanford, one of my favorite studies we came across in this book is called Give Your Ideas Some Legs. And what they found is that the best way to generate creative insight after a period of hard work is a 5 to 15 minute walk. There's all kinds of interesting brain science as to why that happens, but it's that same basic principle that, in this case, to grow, which would be creative insight, you've got to immerse yourself and kind of quote-unquote stress yourself, then step away, and it's really when you step away that the brain goes to work, and then the result is the creative insight. Now you've probably figured out, when I speak about stress, it's not referring to it in a more conventional wisdom, such as like the stress that might come with being in an argument with your partner or significant other, or the stress that comes with a potential job promotion. The way that I define stress is much more of a biological definition. So it's a stimulus that challenges you and perhaps makes you uncomfortable. And there are 2 components to this concept of stress. So the first are, how do you find that right amount of stress? It's actually quite easy in a weight room, because if you pick up the way too heavy weight, you can't. You pick up the light weight, it feels pretty light. It's a lot harder when you step outside of the weight room to figure out what is the right stress. And then the second is just this notion of deep focus, undistracted work, which is rarer today than ever. Finding the right amount of stress. My co-author and I call these just manageable challenges. So it's a challenge that's ever so slightly outside of your comfort zone and somewhere in between arousal and boredom. So I love this chart. We did not come up with it. A researcher named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi did. And what is on the bottom axis, for those that are a little bit further back, is someone's skill level going from low to high. And then on the vertical axis is the level of the challenge, also going from low to high. So if it's a very low challenge and you have a very high skill level, you're going to probably feel relaxed. You're just kind of at ease, almost going through the motions. If the skill level is medium and the challenge is low, you haven't really mastered the craft and it's not really challenging, you might be bored. Now the flip side is, if the challenge level is really high, but you don't have the skills for what you're doing, the emotion that accompanies that might be anxiety. So that's not the good growth-promoting stress. The best kind of growth-promoting stress is when the skill level is high and the challenge is just ever so slightly higher than the skill level. So somewhere between what this researcher Csikszentmihalyi would call arousal and being in flow. And when you're in flow, you're like completely in the zone. Another way to conceptualize it is, let's say that you are thinking about this equation in terms of your career. So if you think about a project that you know that you've got in the bag and you can nail if you took on, that's probably maybe boredom, maybe even relaxation if you're really strong in that area. The flip side would be to take on something where if you signed up for it, you'd be losing sleep every single night, feeling your pulse in your chest, just like completely in over your head. That's like picking up way too heavy of a weight. That's not really conducive to growth. What you're after is that challenge that's just ever so slightly more than what you've done. So maybe you're confident, but you're just a little bit uncertain as to whether or not you're actually gonna, nail the project or succeed. And those are the good growth promoting types of quote unquote stress or a just manageable challenge that you'd look for. The notion of this broader definition of stress is deep focus work, and really being completely present while you're working. So a couple practices that help support this. So the first is cell phones, not just off, but should really be out of sight. So there's fascinating new research that shows that having a cell phone in the room with you when you're working detracts from the quality and even the quantity of your work, even if the phone is off, even if the phone is turned over, and most remarkably, even if the phone's not your own. So in a very interesting study, researchers had two individuals have a 30-minute conversation, and they were primed to have a conversation on a certain topic. And in the experimental group, the researcher's phone was on the table and turned over, so just like this. But not even the people in the conversation, just the researcher's phone. And in the control group, there was a notebook on the table turned over. And after they had the conversation, they did a whole battery of tests to see who absorbed what, and basically to gauge the quality of conversation and knowledge retainment. And the cell phone group was like 60% lower than the notebook group. And that's because when we are so conditioned to be swiping down on our cell phone and like looking for that next little, whether it's an email, something in social media, some kind of stimulus that is like a reaffirmation that we exist and we're important in the world. So it's actually a pretty strong reward when you think about what you're getting from your cell phone. That even if the phone's not yours, just having it there, your subconscious mind is a little part of your brain's like, I wonder what's happening in the world. Or I wonder who's trying to get in touch with me. I wonder what's happening on my Facebook. If it's your phone, what happens is you end up wasting more energy resisting the temptation to check it. So you might as well just check the thing, but then you're checking the thing, you're not really doing deep focus work. So that was a big takeaway for me personally. I used to work with my phone in my pocket or on the desk, and now when I'm really trying to write and get in the zone, I will tell my wife, Caitlin, don't get anxious, I just don't have my phone with me. I'll go to the coffee store without my phone altogether, because I know if it's there, it'll be a distraction. And this notion of deliberate practice, which is really when you're working hard, it should feel hard. Like you should feel fatigued at the end of a working block. And then for athletes, no music during the workout. Because, again, if you're really trying to learn a new skill or capability, you want to be completely there and in touch with how your body's feeling. And music kind of takes you out of that. It's almost like a crutch, because if something gets uncomfortable, well, you've got the music to distract you, rather than really knowing what that feels like and figuring out where your line is. So that's the first half of the growth equation. So stress, right? So physiologically, it's a challenge that is not going to injure you, but it's going to be very uncomfortable. And psychologically, it's somewhat similar. It's stepping outside of your comfort zone. So not something that's going to make you anxious, but something that you're not sure you've got in the bag, very hard work. Stress is only beneficial if it's followed by a period of rest and recovery. So artists, if all they're going to do is practice or work hard or be at the canvas nonstop, never step away, never sleep, their careers will not be long. Athletes, same thing. It's called overtraining syndrome. You train yourself into the ground. And even in business, like it's lionized the entrepreneur that sleeps 3 hours a night. If you actually look at the data, the most successful leaders of large companies, and particularly in entrepreneurial endeavors, they do have periods of time where they do work very hard indeed, but those that sustain long careers, they actually report sleeping like 8 to 9 hours a night, and they support the quote-unquote stress of their day with appropriate rest. So rest is just a transition from your kind of innate fight or flight stress response, so that like really being zoned in, to a more restful state, which allows your conscious, effortful mind to turn off. So various types of rest. We already mentioned, or I already mentioned, excuse me, a short walk or some kind of other exercise, particularly if you're doing something very cerebral, is a wonderful way to just let your conscious mind turn off. Listening to music, spending time in nature. I think if you pair these three, like you really hit a home run. There's really neat research that I came across that even just looking at pictures, research at the University of Michigan, a guy named Mark Beeman found that even just looking at pictures of nature can help enhance creativity during breaks. So the best quote-unquote like break would be to step away from what you're doing and actually go put yourself in green space for a few minutes. But even just looking at pictures of nature has an effect of increasing creative thinking. Naps, open monitoring meditation, and then last but not least is sleep. And I could talk for hours just about sleep. Sleep is like by far one of the most productive things that you can do. So your body doesn't grow when you're exercising or when you're working out. Your body actually grows when you sleep. That's when all the good growth promoting hormones are released. Same thing with your mind. So your brain is exposed to all kinds of information during the day, but it consolidates, connects, stores. All that stuff happens when you're sleeping. So it's almost like, again, whether you're an athlete in the gym, or you're doing more cerebral work, or you're an artist, the work that you're doing throughout the day, that's just like the stimulus that kind of sets the stage. But if you're not able to step away and mainly sleep, a lot of that value is lost, because a lot of the magic happens when you step away. The last piece of this is really important too, which is this notion that stress is global. So, like, your body's physiology doesn't really delineate between physical stress, emotional stress, cognitive stress, psychological stress. And I think where a lot of what world-class performers do really well is they zone in. They're not very balanced. They have one thing, and they nail this equation of one thing. I think where a lot of people, myself included, run into problems is when you take on maybe 4 just manageable challenges in 4 areas of your life, and it's just a complete overload. So it's taking on an enormously challenging project at work, trying to run your first marathon, having your first kid, and caring for a sick parent. Even though there are 4 different areas, it's really, really hard to be good in any one if you're stretched that thin. How does this equation play out over the course of a day? This is an athlete doing something called interval training. In interval training, you train real hard, and then you rest and recover. And then you train real hard again, and rest and recover. All kinds of research shows that it's a wonderful way to structure your day, even if you're not an athlete. It tends to be, at least the evidence shows, that working blocks of between 40 to 90 minutes of on, and then breaks of 6 to 30 minutes produces the most quantity and quality of work. And this held true across all the world-class performers that we reported. The weekend, something that a lot of people don't take, and I'm guilty of this more often than I wish, is, you know, the initial Sabbath was supposed to be a day of rest, and I think a lot of people neglect that, and we're always on. Again, it's a leap of faith, especially if you're in an intense job, to step away and rest, but all the research shows that it's when you step away that the magic happens. And following an off day in musicians, writers, and visual artists, creativity like went through the roof. Vacation. So vacations of 7 to 10 days can almost completely eliminate the symptoms of burnout. That doesn't mean that it fixes, like if you go back into a situation that was causing burnout, the problem's not solved. It's kind of a Band-Aid, but it's very, very powerful to just completely step away from what you're doing and take time off. So, growth equation, stress plus rest equals growth. The second big theme was priming. And again, that is really trying to elicit the right state of body or mind to be your best. So, the first slide is around warm-ups. So there's all kinds of advice in the self-help world around routine. Right? If you only drink this exact coffee at this hour, or go to sleep late and wake up late, or go to sleep early and wake up early. Lots of very prescriptive advice. Unfortunately, my co-author and I found that there really is no single best warm-up routine across a population. If anyone tells you that they've got the perfect routine figured out and if you just follow it you'll be great, I would be very skeptical. That might be the perfect routine for that person, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. That said, there usually is a best warm-up routine for a specific person. There's just a lot of individual variation. So the only way to find out what works for you is to really experiment and individualize. The science here says that your hormonal profile absolutely changes once you've found out what makes you feel good. But like what I like to say is, like, of course it does. That's why you feel good. So it seems so elementary, but really the only scientific advice in this whole area of routine is to try to figure out what makes you feel good and do that. There was a coach that we spoke with named Dave Hamilton who coaches women's field hockey, and he's also a scientist. And his gals, they were doing remarkable at practice, but they couldn't put it together in competition. And he really was trying to get to the bottom of this and trying to figure out what can I do to prime these women to be at their best on game day. So he started to experiment with routines. And what he would do is he'd have them go through a warm-up routine, and then he'd take a salivary test to measure the hormones testosterone and cortisol. And you want to have more testosterone than cortisol. Testosterone's a good hormone, cortisol not so good when you're trying to perform well athletically. What he found is that if he had a forward, so someone that's used to scoring goals, if they did a warm-up that involved kind of scoring and movements that forwards would normally have, they'd have really good testosterone to cortisol ratios. But if you had them do more strength-based work or playing defense, the ratio wouldn't be so good. So his finding was figure out what makes the person feel good and just have them do that, because the hormonal profile will follow. Which is really interesting because in the coaching world, a lot of coaches think you've got to figure out this specific routine, but it's really just figuring out what makes an athlete feel good and then have him or her do that. Outside of sports, we asked everyone that we spoke to about what to tell us about their routine, and there was like zero common thread, which again kind of supports this notion that unfortunately there is no plug-and-play routine, but if you can figure out what makes you feel good and do that, you set the stage to perform pretty well. So this practice is perhaps the only quote-unquote hack in this entire book, and that is because it's based in a lot of science. It's called Turning Anxiety into Excitement. So if someone is nervous before a big event, and whether that's an athletic event, whether that's pitching a venture capital firm, or whether it's public speaking in a setting like this, the conventional wisdom is to try to get yourself to calm down. That's kind of what I've been told since I was a kid, right? Take a few deep breaths, calm down. If you're trained in taking a few deep breaths and calming down, that can be very effective. But very few people are actually trained in relaxation or meditation to be able to do that. So what ends up happening is you tell yourself, like, oh, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling nervous, I need to calm down, I'm going to take a few deep breaths. Well, you've done two things. The first is that you've told yourself that something's wrong, right? I'm feeling anxious. Why else would you need to calm down? The second is now you're relying on this practice of taking deep breaths that, again, some people have practiced and mastered this, but most haven't. So you take the deep breaths and you don't feel any better. Then you're like, oh crap, like I'm nervous, I'm trying to calm down and I can't, it must mean things are really bad. And then you don't perform very well because you've kind of just gotten into this cycle of rumination. So the other side of that coin is to think of those sensations that you're feeling as neutral. It's only when you assign them as angst that they become angst. So what researchers have found is that it's as simple as telling yourself that the sensations I'm feeling, so it might be a rapid heartbeat, or raised body temperature, even maybe butterflies in your stomach, you tell yourself, that's excitement. I am getting ready to speak. I am getting ready to crush this swimming race. That's my body. All my perceptions are being heightened for this big high-stakes presentation. This has been evaluated in national class swimmers as well as with public speaking. And in both cases, this technique of trying to shift anxiety into excitement, telling yourself you're excited rather than trying to calm down, has been really effective and led to better performance. This is something that I've completely adopted since coming across, and I've personally found pretty valuable. Nothing groundbreaking here, but just super powerful. The people around you like absolutely shape you. They have a completely profound impact on everything that you do. This is in the literature that motivation is contagious, but also just throughout reporting, everyone that we spoke to, again, whether athlete, artist, entrepreneur, they all talked about the village of support around them and just how important it is to surround yourself with people that are going to bring out the best in you. And I think that we often feel like we don't have so much freedom to do that, but there are often more degrees of freedom than I think at least, or that most people think that we do have to do so. And then this last notion of being a minimalist to be a maximalist. So what this means is that if you really, really want to be great at something, or even just try to get better at something, to be a quote-unquote maximalist, you have to be a minimalist elsewhere. It's impossible to be great at everything. I think that we're constantly told to like strive for balance and to, you know, have perfect balance in our life and just have everything in balance. I almost think that's like a false, too high bar to strive for, because like eventually something will give. I think that I said it earlier. So what these great performers that my co-author and I spoke with, they were really clear about like just eliminating trivial things in your life. So if you really want to be great at running, like don't worry about how you look when you're out there, because that's just wasted energy. It doesn't matter. And then there's this broader theme that when the professional heat is on, turn down the heat elsewhere. So you just, it's a long-winded way of saying it's very, very hard to do everything at once. And I think the key takeaway for me was there's, again, so much kind of talk in the popular culture about trying to have balance in your life. And I think the better advice might be to be self-aware of sacrifices and trade-offs that you're making, and to make those choices and be self-aware as you make them versus try to strive for this kind of illusory balance. And then the third section of the book was on purpose. So this is a picture of people lifting an SUV off of a man that was stuck under the SUV. And these stories, while rare, are actually more common than I thought. These things happen a couple times a decade. And they shouldn't happen, because if you were to ask the people that lifted the truck to lift that truck in any other condition, they would not be able to. You could say, I will pay you $15 million to lift that SUV, and the person would not be able to lift that SUV. These incidences happen so often that in the literature, there's a name for them. They're called acts of hysterical or superhuman strength. So again, feels a little new agey, so here's some science. Researchers at University of Pennsylvania, they had individuals go in an fMRI machine to look at pictures of their brain. And the control group, they didn't tell anything. They just said, go in the machine and we're gonna present you with some situations. And they presented them with very threatening situations. The experimental group, they had them reflect on their core values and the things that they held most dear to them. And most people had core values that were self-transcendent. So being a good community member, being a good spouse, being a good parent. What they found is the individuals that reflected on those self-transcendent core values, when they were given threatening situations, activity in the part of their brain that was associated with fear was much more diminished than those that weren't told to think about their core values. So what they speculate is that when you're reflecting deeply on something that's beyond yourself, the part of your brain that is literally associated with yourself, it kind of goes offline. And there's another model of fatigue and exercise science called the psychobiological model. Excuse me. And what this model says is that fatigue is about perception of effort versus motivation. So perception of effort, how hard something feels, motivation, why you're doing it. When perception of effort is greater than motivation, you slow down or you stop. When motivation is greater than perception of effort, you might speed up, or at least you keep on going. When they're aligned, you stay the same pace. Again, this was born in exercise science, but it plays out in the research and the literature across all kinds of different fields. One of my favorite studies that my co-author and I came across was with hospital custodians and janitors. And at the start of the study, they took a group of custodians. They split them in half. One group was just told to continue to go about their work. The other group was educated on staph infections, which are really pretty deadly infections that spread around hospitals quite quickly. And they were told that as a result of their work in keeping the hospital really clean, they minimize infection risk and they save lives. And that was the only intervention. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 classes to teach the janitors about the risk of infection and how their work diminished that risk. And then they just let them do their jobs for, I think it was either 6 months or a year, between 6 months and a year. The control group that had nothing, the turnover was like 50%. Custodial work, there's very high turnover, and the quality of the work was the same. The intervention group that was reminded of the purpose of their work and how it helped save patients, the turnover was cut in half, and the quality of their work improved. And I immediately linked that back to this model, right? Well, janitorial work it's grunt work. It's not too enjoyable. It's a high perception of effort. And if your motivation for doing it is down here, that's turnover. You're going to stop, or you won't do as good of a job. Whereas if your motivation is up here because you're preventing staph infections, you're saving you're saving lives, much more likely to do it. This was one of the most fascinating parts of the reporting on the book, whether it was Meb Keflezighi that recently won the Boston Marathon. I got to read a quote from Ashton Eaton, who's the world champion and world record holder in the decathlon. Whether it was a sculptor named Emil Alzamora, who has really slowly had to climb through the ranks, Taylor Swift's drummer, a mathematician that recently passed away named David Goss. Every single world-class performer that we spoke with had some kind of greater purpose underlying their work. And without fail, they said that when the going got tough, they don't think like how great it will be to be champion, or how much money they might make, or their ego. They constantly came back to that greater purpose, and that's what got them through. So I'm going to read 2 quotes. The first one is from Ashton Eaton. So, like I said, he recently set the world record in the decathlon, and the decathlon is a grueling event. It's actually 10 events simultaneously over the course of like 2 days. And going into the last event, Ashton Eaton, he'd already won the gold medal at the World Championship. So he had outperformed everyone else on the first 9 events by so much that this last event didn't even matter. And the record that he'd be trying to break was his own record that he set 2 years prior. So he had no reason to go kill himself running a 1500. But he went out there, and I think he needed to run a 417 to break. He needed to run below a 418 to break the record. And he ran a 417. And after, everyone in the media was dumbfounded. They're like, "What were you doing? It's your record. You've already won the gold medal." And Ashton Eaton said, and this is his direct quote, "I was just thinking, it's not for me, so I have to go." And then when they further questioned, he said, "What do you mean by that?" "Really, I was just thinking about me sitting on the couch when I was little and watching somebody like Michael Johnson or Carl Lewis jump and run. And that's the reason I'm here today. I thought maybe there's a kid on a couch somewhere, and if I break this world record, they may be inspired to do something." So, completely greater why, and that's what pushed him to do it. The second quote is from Meb Keflezighi, who the year after the Boston bombing won the marathon. What makes this really special is he was 41 years old when he did it, and he's the first American to have won the race in over 25 years. So at the start of the race, no one thought that Meb Keflezighi had a chance. And after the race, Keflezighi was asked, "What were you thinking about at the end of the race?" You could see the grimace on his face. He was really hurt. He said, "Toward the end, I was remembering the victims who passed away. They helped carry me through." And in a prior talk, some skeptics in the audience, and I'll just preempt this, said, "Well, isn't that just like the politically correct thing to say?" Well, before the race, Meb, on his bib with his race number, the night before, he had written the names of all the victims of the bombings and pulled up their pictures. And he said that he reflected on that, and he showed us the bib. There were their names. So again, it's pretty remarkable the power of having some kind of greater why or a greater calling for what you're doing. That was it. Stress plus rest equals growth. Priming, really trying to elicit yourself, getting the right state of body or mind to perform, and then this notion of self-transcending purpose.